Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Molten Truth. I am your host, Zoey Michaels. And if you've been with us for any length of time with our episodes, you know our stories are always about people who have had challenges in their life that came out of left field. They figured out a way to get through them and to improve their life, made their own life better, hopefully made the lives around them better. So that's what the Molten Truth is all about. Today's guest is a fellow podcaster, so hopefully you've checked out his podcast, and if you haven't yet, be sure you do so. His website is here at the bottom of the screen, empoweredgriefjourney.com. He is Chris Mamone. I'm probably butchered it again, but he is the founder of Empowered Grief Journey, and he is on a mission to change how we think about grief, not as something to fix, but as a journey to grow through. And he's honest, bold, heart-centered, helping people turn pain into personal power. So that, is Chris in a nutshell. Without any further ado, I'm going to introduce him and let him speak for himself.
I love that. Zoe, thank you for having me on the show this afternoon. I'm really glad you and I had a chance to connect.
Me too.
So
I know I really enjoyed our off-screen time.
Yeah, no worries. No, for your listeners, my name is Chris Mamone, as Zoe said, and I'm what's called an acceptance coach. I work in the grief space, and I help move people from a place of pain to a place of hope and healing in their grief journey. And I deal with people from all walks of life and all different grief experiences and losses. And what I'll share with you guys is a little bit about my journey, how I got started with that. Back in 2020, I watched my grandfather pass away in front of me from terminal cancer. And that was very, very hard to go through. That's my first experience watching somebody pass on and transition. 2 years after that, I was blessed with another unfortunate situation and lost my first child to stillbirth. His heart stopped the day before he was supposed to be born. And so that one was the one that really broke me. And I went down a very dark depression road for quite a few years after that. It was a very hard place because that's the one part of life that happened to go in reverse for me. I'm supposed to go before my own children, is what was in my head. And so that was a very hard road to navigate. But what I learned along these grief journeys is that society has grief very backwards. It doesn't understand grief. And so what my mission is and my goal is to show people that grief is not something to let go of and move on from and get over it. Those kind of things you hear, it's not about that. What it is about is a personal transformation journey, because who you're going to be after going through grief, who you're becoming, is not who you were before you went through it. And so I help walk people through that transformation process. And that's what inspired me to get into the grief space, so that I can help you guys learn how to navigate your own journey through grief and healing and find your own empowered grief journey. Because my son empowered me to help other people better understand grief and better understand themselves. And when I see people unlock their gifts through grief, it's a very powerful moment that I get very excited about, because they're going to go out in the world and do exactly what I'm doing, which is helping other people in their own capacity. So it's been a very rough journey to get where I'm at, but I'm also very blessed and very grateful for how my journey's unfolded, because I wouldn't be here today on this podcast, and I wouldn't be helping people in the capacity that I am had I not gone through those experiences of life.
That is amazing. I was taking a chance to just kind of peruse your website ahead of time, just to try to get more of a sense of what you do. And I think it's fascinating that not only do you do one-on-one coaching, but you also have a group, and the sense of the group is to really to support each other. And I really like the feel when I was reading through your website about that.
Well, thank you. That's something that I started because I realized as I got further into the grief space, there's no 12-step guide for grief. There's no one book you can read and say, oh, I got it figured out, I'm all good. It doesn't exist. And so what I did find, though, is that through my podcast, I've done 85 episodes up to this date. And every guest that comes on my show has dealt with grief differently. And they've taught me things, by the way. I don't know everything about grief. I try to learn as much as I can. But my guests have taught me like I've learned from them. And so what I learned is that we all have an individual journey with grief, but it's through the storytelling it's through the power of other people coming across our path to help us and guide us that we can learn to find our own path. And that's really the beauty of why grief is so personal and so individual of a journey, but it's something that helps other people find their own path and navigate their own journey. So I'm really been inspired by having group coaching and having my grief groups that I have going right now, because I learn from them and they learn from me, and we walk this journey together so that none of us have to feel alone.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. Because when you think about it, I mean, it's almost like a fingerprint, the way each of us deals with our grief. No two people are exactly alike, just like no two fingerprints are exactly alike. I'd be curious if it's comfortable or if you can think of an example. Like, what's the most unusual way that you've encountered with the way that someone would deal with their grief? Just out of
Uh,
curiosity.
I have met everybody from every walk of life, but what I will share is that women tend to be more open and emotional with grief. They tend to be more in it, if you will, trying to
Mm,
understand it, trying to process it. Men hide their emotions a lot. I don't know what it is with us men, but men are not very in touch with their emotions. And so I see that a lot where there's men that just need a little help in the form of questions and holding space and making them know that vulnerability is not a weakness, it's a strength,
yeah.
and giving them the opportunity to express how they feel. And, with men in particular that I've worked with, anger has been the big one, because men know how to be silent and be angry. And it's something that I'll share with you guys that I'm trying to break is the stigma in society that women are overly emotional and men don't feel. Well, that's an old stereotype that we're going to break, and I'm going to break it today too, because this is what I do. Women aren't overly emotional. Women know how to read emotions. They know how to understand them. Now, men aren't taught that. We're taught to suck it up and be tough and put on a nice face because you can fight through it. You can get through it. So we know how to be silent. We know how to be angry, but we don't know the in between. And so what I'm trying to break down is that if we can get rid of those stigmas, by the way, why don't we learn from women how to feel emotion, how to understand emotion and work through it? And why don't we teach men that vulnerability is not weakness, it's strength? And learning that there's more to life than anger and silence in a moment of grief. There's so much more there for us to learn. And if we get rid of that stigma, by the way, and open our minds and open ourselves up to learning and growing, and all encompassing understanding that grief is there to teach us, it's there to move us forward in our life, it's not there to hold us back, we can seize the opportunities in grief and collectively become a better society as a whole.
I really like that. I'm a very visual person. So, often when people express themselves, pictures are coming into my head. And as you were talking about how men only like maybe, the stigma that they only feel anger or, it's the other extreme of like, suck it up, be quiet. I couldn't help but think about black and white versus the whole color spectrum.
Mhm.
And, women, like you said, we have that whole color spectrum of range of emotions. We're not taught to repress it, although some of us still do. That's something I've personally been working on myself with the challenges I've had that moved me into the space to start talking to people. And recently, just because I'm a big believer in using music as a programming
Mm.
language to help process. Um, I actually have a song for myself about, expressing those emotions and how it's not a weakness to express, because I needed to hear that. So even though we are more in tune with our emotions, there's still that, especially in like certain family cultures. In my family, emotion bad. So or there's in my case, my grandmother was like, oh my goodness, oh, highly emotional, overly emotional. And so I really have frowned on that in my life. And I'm having to get past that because it's the only way to heal.
Yeah, that's the thing is that our family structure, going back generations, they kind of teach us certain things, and that's something I try to tell people in the grief world is you got to be open to questioning your beliefs. And I know that's a scary thing for so many people. If I was to
Yeah.
mention that to half the people in the world, they'd flip out on me in a heartbreak. But the reality of the following is why I bring this up. is that you were raised in a family. You had mom and dad, or maybe like me, you had a mom and a grandparents kind of thing. You didn't have dad in the picture, or vice versa.
Yeah.
But you took your beliefs from your family. You took them
Yeah.
on. And so you never question, by the way, if you agree with them or if they're supportive in your life or if they're
Mhm.
helping you or they're hurting you. You never questioned it. You just said, these are my beliefs and stuck to them. That's what I got to do. And so when we go through grief, that's when things get questioned. That's why people don't handle grief very well, is because that belief comes into question of, is this serving me or not? Is this helping me or hurting me? Is it moving me forward or holding me back? Is it causing me pain or is it fixing my problem? And so people go through that shift in grief, and that's why they struggle so much, is because we're having an identity crisis. We're having a moving away from who we were and stepping into who we're becoming. And that
Yeah.
gap in between there is self discovery. And that's what we aren't taught. We're not taught that very well. We're taught
I,
to
right.
be conditioned and, take on other people's beliefs, but we never question why.
True. And I 100% agree with you. I really, I've learned so much by talking to people, by listening, and found myself even doing things that were part of my healing journey. And then asking myself, okay, well, why did I feel the need to do that? And that's what led to the discovery that I had accidentally stumbled upon something that was a scientific principle. And that's why I was healing. That's why I was feeling better. But I didn't know that until I asked the right questions or heard something that led to those questions. So,
That's the beautiful thing that you just said about questions. And I always encourage people to ask yourself a better question. The quality of your questions is the quality of your life. And if you ask bad questions, you get a bad life. If you ask powerful questions or deep questions, you will get a very powerful life. And I know that sounds very simple, very basic, and somebody might think I'm crazy, which is fine. I totally respect you. But I will say that going through what I've gone through in my life, I started asking those deeper questions. I could say, by the way, using my own example, if I was to walk around and say, why did this happen to me? Why did my son die? Why did my grandfather have to pass that way? I put myself in a victim state. Now I'm at cause of my circumstance. And now my belief system is going to be that these bad things happened to me. And something's wrong here because this happened to me. And so now you're blaming everything around you. And you're never actually sitting there saying, is there some other different thing going on right now? Is there an opportunity? Is there a lesson? Is there a blessing in this moment? Is there a gift that maybe I don't see? And so that's where I got to a place in my grief when it was very, very heavy and I was very depressed. And I finally told myself, I said, what if this all happened for you? What if it happened for helping you, not to you? What if it happened for you? And I sat there and said, okay, I lost a child. That's really hard to ask that question in that moment. But I started sitting there thinking about it and I said, it was a brutal moment. It was very brutal, but it was very beautiful at the same time. I learned a lot of things about love. I learned a lot about myself. I learned what I don't like in my life, what's not working for me. So this thing that could be seen as an awful tragedy was actually the biggest blessing and the biggest gift I ever got. And it was what a lot of people ask me about on earlier podcasts that I've done. I call it the gift in shitty wrapping paper. We didn't want it like this. We look at it and go, "Ugh, what is this? Like, get rid of it." But when we actually take that wrapping paper off and we look at it, this is where the questions come in. Did this happen for me? What can I learn from this moment? Or what's this trying to teach me or show me? What can I
right.
learn from this? Your mindset goes 180 degrees. And this is where, I share with people, I celebrate and honor my son every day when I share his story. His story helps people go through their own grief. I can sit there and say it's brutal and terrible and all those things that people want to label it. And that's fine. That's very true in some aspect, but it was also a very big gift and a very big blessing. And so, how can I not be grateful, by the way, and honor and celebrate my son for all of the good that came out of that situation and for the good that I get to give to other people? That's the power of asking great questions.
True. And I mean, the fact is, yes, that was a horrible thing to happen to you. It's horrible when anyone loses a family member or tragedy strikes in some way. And unfortunately, we live in a world where that does happen to all of us in one way or another to varying degrees. But it comes down to, what are you going to do? Are you going to lay there and give up, or are you going to pick yourself up and find a way to move forward in a healthy way?
Yeah, I think that's a very powerful thing you just said there because we have a choice in this life to either be a victim of our circumstance, meaning we're a complete cause of our external environment, everything around us, people we talk to, people that tell us how to think, how to feel, how to breathe, what to believe in, what not to believe in. Or we can go within ourselves, by the way. We can always ignore this and just look within and say, what are my values? What do I believe? And this is where, I share with people grief is going to hit everybody. Grief doesn't
Yeah.
discriminate. I hate to tell
No.
you that. It doesn't care what color your skin is. It doesn't care what sexuality you are. It doesn't care where you live. It doesn't care what culture you belong to. It doesn't care
Mhm.
if you're a man, a woman. It doesn't matter. It doesn't care. Grief is always going to affect you. So the reality is, like you just said, Zoe, you can fall down and lay down on it if you want. That's always an option. You can always do that. But you can also at the same time say, this might be an opportunity for me. It might be something that I need to go through, that I need to learn from, that I need to
Yeah,
experience. And so
exactly.
grief can become our greatest teacher.
Hmm. It's true. It's true. And one of the things I've come to realize in my own life as well, and I'm sure you've run into it, is when we bury those feelings, it's like when you bury seeds, eventually they're going to come and sprout in another way in your life later on and possibly create more damage than if you had simply dealt with them in a positive way, in a productive way to begin with. And it hurts. It's scary. You know, when I had my experience earlier this year, and mine had to deal with being scammed, um, my instinct was to just bury it, like an ostrich buries its head in the sand kind of thing. I did not want to deal with it. I did not want to talk about it. But I got mad, and I got mad at
Mm.
the right source. And I said, you know what? No, if I stay quiet, the bad guy wins. So, yes, I feel ashamed. Yes, I have this issue. But if I stay quiet, the only one who's going to be hurt more is me. So, I did what was completely unthinkable. And I started speaking publicly about it. Never thought I would do that. Did not want to be the poster child for people who'd been scammed. But the surprising thing for me was that it helped me heal faster. And I later, by asking the questions, discovered that, there was a scientific principle about when you speak about things, it helps to lessen the emotional damage. I didn't know that going in. Um, so it's been interesting, just the learning process of dealing with that situation. But going back to the idea of you can bury those seeds and they can sprout later, or you can deal with them. Uh-oh. Something happened where I can't hear you. It was right around the time you took your
Oh,
headset off. There we
sorry.
go. Okay.
We had some tech issues come up.
Whoops.
um, anyway, we'll edit that out. To your point, Zoe, when we bury our grief feelings, when we do that, it builds inside of us. And I always tell people the analogy of, if you ever watch a Chinese ping pong tournament and you watch that ball flying across the table at 100 miles an hour, like back and forth, grief does that inside your body. Grief will tear up yourself. That's why you get ailments. That's why you feel sick, or you might feel it in your lungs. You might feel a backache that doesn't go away. And you might be stretching and exercising and it's still sitting there. Grief does that when you keep it trapped inside you. So Zoe said about letting that seed grow, let that grief out. It doesn't matter if it's got to come out in anger or sadness or whatever it may be. Let it come out. Let it breathe. Because when you release it, it's an emotion, and emotions, it has the word motion in it. And so emotions are not meant to sit still or be trapped or suppressed or controlled. They're meant to go. They're meant to move. And so to build off of what you're saying, though, is that emotions are there to give us messages. They're there for us to listen to. And so I always share with people in the grief journey, I'll ask them sometimes, I'll say, what emotion are you feeling right now? And if they say, like, I am upset, I said, no, you feel upset. I said, what's causing you to feel upset? And I ask deeper questions, and they always will say, well, it was this or this that happened in circumstance XYZ that caused me to feel this way. And I go, there we go. Now we're getting somewhere. And I get them to walk through that emotion process, because when we walk through that emotion, it's unlocking those answers inside of us. And when we actually acknowledge that emotion and we see it, we hear it, and we understand it, it dissipates. The whole pressure comes off you. And you've actually unlocked that feeling you've been looking for a long time.
Absolutely. I think it's interesting too how we all process it differently. Some people are very verbal. They just need to verbalize it and they feel better. Verbal is not my first instinct, surprisingly. For me, I have always connected best with myself when I've written. And I didn't fully realize that until this year. But, I found myself, with friends, I needed to tell them about this, but I could not. I was so overwhelmed emotionally that I could not have a coherent conversation with them without breaking down. And again, family background, like I hate emotion because of my grandma. And so I was like, okay, I can't do this. I cannot have a conversation with you where you can understand what I'm upset about. So I'm going to write you letters. And so that was how I processed that. Like, okay, you are my hostage and I'm writing you these letters and you're going to have to read them, or at least give me the illusion that you've read them. And it was that kind of clued me into, well, maybe journaling would be a good thing for me to consider doing to help process my grief. That was a discovery.
I love that you brought that up. I love that you found a modality that works for you, because I'm very, very big about that in the grief process. Most people don't know this, by the way, but there's people that are auditory. So if you talk or they listen to something, they pick it up really fast and super easy. Other people are visual. So if they watch something like a podcast, they'll pick it all up. There's kinesthetic people like me that I have to listen to it and see it to process it, or it just goes in one ear out the other, and that's it. And so learning what modality works best for you and which way, like you said, you're going outward with you being verbal just doesn't fit right, doesn't feel right for whatever reason. That's okay. Nothing wrong with that. But when you found that writing modality, how powerful was that?
Super powerful. And then when I coupled it with writing songs and using AI to bring my songs to life so I could hear and basically channel my energy in a positive direction, that also gave me a lift. So I think I'm maybe a dual modality where that's concerned.
I love that for you.
Yeah. But, just things I've discovered by asking the right questions.
Yeah, that's the power of questions is huge. That's what I share with people. If you want a better answer, ask a better question. People say like, why am I so angry? Now, don't ask why you're angry. You're blaming yourself. Now you're getting yourself more mad because you're blaming. Instead, say, what's causing me to feel angry today? What did I experience today that might have triggered this emotion? What was that? And really dive underneath those things. I found out early on when I lost my son, I was making a box for his ashes and I got really ticked off and the box wasn't cooperating. And I tried to smash it with my foot. And long story short, the box won. My foot didn't. I ended up in a boot for 6 weeks with crutches. That was a fun time of life. And what I'll say about that is I was crawling on my hands and knees up the stairs because I couldn't walk when it happened. And I was cussing and screaming and upset. I was really upset my kid wasn't there. I was upset I was having to even work on this project. I was upset that my life was not what I wanted it to be. And so underneath all that anger was all this love, all this, I miss my kid, all that. That's what all that anger was. It wasn't anger. It was underneath that thing. So I use that example to share with people when you ask better questions and dig deep because you want to find that emotion. When I found out, by the way, that was my love for my son coming out. Every time I got angry after that randomly without cause, 'cause that's what grief does to you. I asked myself, are you missing Caden today? Are you having a really hard time with your grief today? I didn't ask, why am I angry or what's being angry for me? I said, are you missing your son right now? Are you wishing things were different? And that would take the intensity of the emotion and bring it down because now I've acknowledged it. And now you can make a different choice, by the way. You can figure out how you want to work through that.
It's so true. It's amazing how verbalizing what has caused you to feel that emotion really does help take the edge off. It helps to somehow bring you back more in balance, where you can then cope with it and you can start doing something productive. That it's such an amazing power.
It is. My goal with what I do with coaching is to give people their personal power back, because grief, I'll share this with anybody who's gone through a loss like I have. It doesn't have to be on my magnitude. It can be whatever hits you the hardest. You feel very vulnerable. You feel very emotional. You feel very I don't mean this in the negative way, but you feel out of control of yourself. Like you don't have a say in what's happening or what outcome is going to happen. And that's a very scary place, especially when you brought up being scammed. That's very scary. Like, who took my identity? Who took my information? What's going to happen next? How do I take care of it? See how your brain just like wants to spiral?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You
You
fear
feel,
everything.
yeah. I mean, you feel out of control in a sort of way that it's because you don't have control. And that's where it's very, very hard. And if you focus on the wrong questions or focus on that first emotion you feel, it's going to misguide you and it's going to cause you to feel more out of control. And then you might make a decision or say something or feel a certain way that's got nothing to do with what's actually going on underneath those things.
True.
One of the biggest things I learned in my own personal coaching over the last 10 years is I've studied a lot of stoicism, and something Marcus Aurelius is very big about is I don't worry about what's not in my control. I worry about what's in my control. And I can share when you're going through grief, that's a really hard one to do. But if you can think in terms of that and say, I don't have control over XYZ, I'm going to let it go and just let it sail off in the distance. You can really take back your power a lot, and it'll actually make you feel more grounded. It'll make you feel more safe. It'll make you feel more comfortable. That's not to say it's going to take away the pain of anything, because it truthfully doesn't, but it eases things up a little bit, and it creates this ability to control where your mind goes and what you allow it to do, so that you don't spiral as much. And that way you can really, in that place too, by the way, talking about our emotions and questions, that gets you that into that place where you can really start asking yourself powerful questions and not letting your emotions run you. You can understand your emotions better and find a way to, have those things dissipate after you get the messages you're looking for.
Absolutely. Now, I don't think I saw anything on your website about it, but I have to ask, just because I've read so many amazing books along these lines. In fact, when I was in my early 20s, my aunt turned me on to 2 books that I still go back to occasionally. One of them is called Feelings Buried Alive Never Die. I think it was by Carol Truman. Very interesting book. And especially because how she related how are you having, pain in your lower back or in this area of your body or that area of your body, and have you connected it with this specific thing, this specific emotion being the source of that pain. Really interesting book. There's another one called You Can Heal Your Life, I think was by Louisa Hayes. I think that was the name. But same basic ideas that, recognize that those emotions are maybe part of why you're feeling those pains in your body. And here's things you can say and do that you might start to see some relief as you process those emotions. So I'm curious, given the type of coaching you do, the conversations, have you written any books, or do you have any plans ever to write any books?
I'm really glad that you asked that question, because I'm actually in the process of writing my first book. It's an anthology series, and I'll share with you guys a story really quickly. I have been thinking my podcast was something a lot bigger and a lot more powerful than I thought it was for the last probably 3 or 4 months, because I've gotten so many guests on there and so many people sharing stories about where they're at in the grief process. So anyway, I'm writing my first anthology book. It's called The Empowered Grief Collective, 23 Stories of Grief That Carved a New Path Forward. And the reason I chose 23 is because my son was born on the 23rd of September, and I wanted to honor his legacy with the book. And so
I like that.
Thank you. And I'm writing my own chapter, and 22 other people are writing their own chapter, but it's going to be my first book. And I have to say I am incredibly blessed and honored with all 22 of these people in my book because they've got such powerful stories. We have turned into a group of people using our grief to better the world. And it's just been nothing but just love and kindness and empathy and compassion and understanding as we've gone through this project, because we started writing our chapters this last few weeks. And
Oh wow!
my
So
Zoom
you
call
just
last
started.
yeah.
Oh,
And my Zoom call last week, we all got very emotional on the call. I was kind of shocked personally because I'm working with people in 3 different countries right now, writing the book. And long story short, everybody said like, hey, this was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. And I found that out over the last week writing my chapter, that it was much, much harder than we all thought. But the reward of it is that we're writing empowering stories for people to take 1 or 2 things out of those chapters and find their own empowered grief journey and really discover how they can heal from grief.
that is so nice. I can't wait. I hope I can maybe get an advanced read copy or help you edit or something. I would love to have a chance to get a look at that.
Yeah, I'd love to offer the advanced reader version when we get to that stage. I'd love to do that for you.
Cool. Maybe we'll have another interview after the book is published, after it gets out there in print.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think what else to ask about, because trying to think, we had such a good time with the pre-interview. I wrote down Chris Mamone, Empowered Grief Journey, why February 78 interviews. That's the full extent of my notes.
I love
I was
that.
having such a good time visiting with you that I was like, okay, this is cool. He's a neat guy.
Well then Zoe, let's do this. I'm all about rolling with the punches on podcasts. Tell me a little bit about, your grief story about getting scammed, because I can tell that's something that affected you on a deep level of things. What was that experience like for you?
So, it's taken me a long time to unravel it. And I think it kind of goes back to the death of a marriage and the death of my mother within 2 weeks of each other. About a year and a half later, the death of a business. And then a friend committed suicide a month or 2. So there was just a lot of negative things going on in my world, right, that led up to this. So I think of it as being in a weakened emotional immune state. Everything I dealt with really weakened me. And by being in a situation where my business was not performing well, I decided to try to get out there and make money in a different way. And that way involved having to be more on social media than I prefer to be, to try to find customers, which meant interacting with strangers. And I usually try to stay away from people I don't know on social media. But this person who was potentially a customer, I interacted with them, and after realizing that maybe they're not a customer, but we had a nice conversation. But telling them, this is the first and last time we're going to talk because this is what I'm looking for, and thinking that was the end of it. He came back, and we had another nice conversation. And again, that's the end of the conversation. And then after a few days, he came back. And so after coming back and still having a nice conversation, like, oh, okay, well, we'll just be friends, So I let my guard down. And I had made a rule long time ago that I would not have that kind of interaction where I would not make friends with someone I did not know in person. But I broke my rule. So that was like the very first thing. And had I stuck by my guns with my rule, we wouldn't have this situation. But I was in that weakened emotional immune state, and I was living by myself. I was, basically a lonely person living by myself. I had friends. It's not that I was, totally alone, but still, when you've been married for 50, giving you some attention and you're talking to them, it makes you feel good. So he wormed his way into my affections and into my money. And the next thing I knew, this person who was supposed to be on their way home, supposedly, because he has a dual citizenship, he was on his way home. His flight took him to Dubai. And because he was traveling on the wrong passport, supposedly he was then detained and then in prison for an extended period of time. And of course, because his best friend, who was also not real estate, a travel agent, and had spent his own money hiring a lawyer, this and that. And they had me good and proper. There's so much more detail. I'm just glossing over to the high points. But basically, they kept me on the hook while they tried to figure out a way to get him out of prison and making sure he had food. And, I lost quite a lot of money. And I had friends who told me, we think you're being scammed. And there was a part of me that was wondering that myself, but I wasn't fully ready to digest that yet. It's an interesting thing when a person's being scammed. Actually, telling them that you think they're being scammed is probably one of the worst things you can do.
Interesting.
Because it's like part of them already wonders that, but they're not ready to hear it. I think it's almost like someone who's on drugs until they're ready. Something happens where they've hit rock bottom. Unless they're willing to take that step. So they have to come to their own conclusion that they're being scammed, because they're always going to be like, well, there's this or this that you don't know about. Or they might talk to the scammer. And the scammer always has some rational, logical explanation for everything. But the thing is, what ties it together for the person being scammed is that emotional link that they have. They're talking to this person daily, sometimes multiple times a day. And if family members are around, but maybe not around enough, they've got a more solid bond with that scammer than they do with people they know in real life. And that's a big part of why they continue to believe the scammer, because the scammer has built that emotional investment in their target. So that's my opinion based on my experiences, and maybe why I did not listen to my friends initially, because there was that bond that had been formed, and they knew what they were doing. So, when I finally came to terms and finally fully like, okay, yes, 100%, I have been scammed. I had to go back and explain this to myself. Like, you're not dumb. So how did you get to this situation? Goes back to writing. I went back and did a timeline of everything to try to understand, why did this progress the way it did? How did I come to this situation? I had to explain it to myself first. And then, so this is me, the silver lining here, right? I've always wanted to write books. I used to put all kinds of notes on Post-it notes and things, but I never actually got to a point where I published anything. I did write one book, but it was just for myself and my friends, like in my 20s. But I never published until this year. And the reason that I moved forward, that was part of my silver lining. I pushed forward and published my first book because I could not afford to go on vacation. And I so badly needed a break that I wrote a book basically that was taking a vacation the only way I could.
I love that.
Yeah, it was good. It's going to be part of a 4-book series. This one's called The Seventh Minute. But it's basically a woman who can't escape. She's stressed out. She's crazy with her family and her work and everything. And she gets a vacation in the most unexpected way. And it's the perfect vacation for her. And I'm not going to give any spoilers because, defeats the purpose of the book. But I will say it's fantasy. It's 100% fantasy. But then my fourth book was the book that I started doing the podcast about, which was about my experience. And more specifically, I didn't want to write a book just specific to, I was scammed, wah. There's value in people sharing their story. I'm not putting anyone down for sharing their story. But I didn't want to simply, be yet another person that I was scammed and this and this. I wanted to create a tool. So I set up a book that was a narrative of, this is what the scammer's thinking. This is what the target's thinking. Now, this is how you escape from this situation. I wanted to give people a way to fight back. I wanted to give friends and family tools to recognize what was going on with their family member, because my family, they knew something was wrong, but they had no clue I was being scammed until I was ready to discuss that with them. And that was long after I should have. So writing helped me to process that, and then it led on to the podcast, which helped me to process and heal. And now I have this wonderful opportunity to write stories, which I've always wanted to do. And I've got so many stories I want to tell. I've got a whole list of stories I intend to tell. So this is my silver lining. And it's been part of my healing, my grief journey. In fact, I had never been on any kind of medication for anxiety or anything in my life until this experience. And about the time that I started writing was about the time I went off that medication. So it was like it replaced what I needed, so I didn't need that medication. So it's been very healing, very therapeutic for me.
It sounds like this experience that was bad up front actually set the course for you to do all these other areas of your life, including writing the book and getting off anxiety meds and things like that. It just put you on this different path where you wanted to be.
Very much so. When I talk about the molten truth, that's what I feel like I lived through. I like silver that's forged in the fire and the impurities come out, leaving just the pure silver. That's how I feel my life has been this last year. Just that healing.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. That's exactly what I talk about in the Empower Grief Journey coaching that I do, is exactly what you just shared with us the last 10 minutes, that these bad things that happen to us at face value, we're going, oh, we don't want this. And why did this have to happen? And how did I fall for this? And why did this happen? And we go down those thoughts in the moment of things. But then when we see the other side of it, just like you shared, now you've written a book and now it's going to be part of a 4-book series. You did meditation for the first time. I mean, all these good things are coming out of one grief moment of your life.
Yeah.
And that's so powerful to see.
Yeah. And that's not to say I still don't have aftermath to deal with. I do. I made enough mistakes that I'm going to be dealing with the aftermath for a while, but at least I can do it with a positive attitude.
Exactly. And you're going to change lives with your book. So it's not all for nothing.
I hope so. I hope that people will take to heart that they need to watch out for their family and even use the questionnaires I designed to help them better help the person understand sooner what the situation they're in and to escape. That's my biggest wish, is just that I want those scammers to go, what's happened? We can't get anyone to do anything because, they're onto us. I would love that. I would love to be a fly on the wall when the scammers are like, why aren't they doing what they're supposed to do?
Yeah, well, I ran into a scammer in a child loss group last month, and I got really heated. I went off on this person in a DM, but they were in a group of lost parents, and this lady wrote a post about losing her son, and it was a very, as a lost parent, I get it. I understand where she was going with things, and I shared a little bit of my story with this woman, but somebody DM'd me on Facebook and tried to play the whole sympathy card thing. And all of a sudden it became like, well, can you give me money for this and this and this? And I said, I just went off on him and I said, you did not just come in a lost parent group with people that have lost children to scam them. I said, no.
They're shameless. They're
I said,
absolutely shameless.
I said, if you want to go do that, go do it in the life coaching group I'm in. I see scammers in there all day long. I mean, if that's what you want to do, go do it over there, but don't take advantage of parents that are going through that. That is
Right.
that's
Right.
some low level life going on right there.
But that's just it. They're looking for people who are ripe for the picking. And usually if you are emotional in an emotionally weakened state, that's their bread and butter. That's what they want. Someone who's dealing with a hard time, whether it's personal or with business or whatever it is.
Yeah,
When you're
that's why
weakened.
I tell people going through grief, I mean, be very careful who you open up to and be very careful what you share because there's people out there, I call them safe people that will not try to do things to you, but other than hold space and let you be and try to walk the journey with you. Then there's other people I call unsafe people, like the
Right.
scammers you talked about and that I've run
Mhm.
into. And those are the
Exactly.
people that are just looking to prey on you and take advantage of you. And
Exactly.
it's really sick. I've seen it happen way too much. And I
So,
don't, this woman, went through losing a son not even 4 months ago. And I said, you're going to do this to this person that just lost the one thing that mattered in life. I said,
mhm.
that's shameless.
It
Like,
really is.
I don't have words for that. So,
Right.
but
Exactly. But here's the thing too. I think it's something about our culture. I like that we have this concept in the United States about innocent until proven guilty. I think
Mhm.
it's a wonderful concept. But when it comes to people online, people we don't know, people we have no real reason to trust, we have to maybe think the opposite. We have to think guilty until proven innocent. And that's hard
couldn't
because
agree
we
more.
live in that concept of innocent until proven guilty. We give people benefit of the doubt. I'm sorry, I'm someplace where the sun's just kind of there we go to do that. But yeah, it's really hard. And that was part of my problem too, as I was being scammed because everything in me was saying, well, benefit of the doubt. I have no solid proof that they're lying. Everything I'm reading tells me that, yeah, things should be okay. But you really, that's not a safe way to think.
Yeah.
And there is such a thing as toxic generosity. This is something I've had to come to terms with, that generosity can be a good thing, but there is such a thing as toxic generosity.
Well,
So,
it's yeah, I tell people in the grief space all the time. There's toxic generosity from people. You see it all the time, and you also see toxic positivity all the time. And I've had a couple people mistake me for being toxic positivity, and I go, I'm the furthest thing from it, by the way, because you can't walk through. I mean, you can. I'll just say that because you have free will, you can do what you want. But I'll just say
mhm.
that you shouldn't go through a grief experience just saying, "Oh, well, it just happened. I'll learn better next time," or "Oh, it didn't affect me." Like that. That is so
Oh,
damaging to
mhm.
yourself, and you're really discrediting your experience, but you're also discrediting yourself in the process because you're not giving yourself the time and space to fully understand or heal or grieve what that loss really was. And so, um, I call it the empowered grief journey for a reason because you're not going to feel all those things up front. It's going to feel completely different.
Yeah.
But when we can get to that phase of acceptance and say, this is what happened, not what I think happened, but what it did happen. And I want to reclaim myself and reclaim my power. That's the place where it's all going to come together for you. And that empower grief journey, you're a prime example of that, Zoe. You're writing books, you're taking better care of yourself. You took that opportunity that happened to you and made your life better. And
Absolutely
that's the whole point of grief is to make your life into who you're becoming.
true. And I've worked kind of on the fringe of medical, so I have a lot of medical analogies. But you know, I keep reminding myself and other people that just like the body can only process so much pain at a time, you might have pain in many places on your body, but your body cannot feel it all at the same time. Otherwise, you would probably go into a coma. And it's the same thing with emotional pain. You might be dealing with this huge emotional pain, but once you process it to a safe point, then other emotions, maybe ones that have been buried, come up. And so you're dealing with only as much pain as your body can tolerate to process at the time, or your mind can tolerate to process at a time. So it's not overnight. It's not even a few months. It is a process, and it takes as long as it takes.
Yeah, that's what people don't understand is that, grief and healing don't have a time limit on them, and they're not some, I wish that's another stereotype I'm trying to break in the society of ourselves is there is not some said thing that says you got to get over this in 30 days. Nobody said that. Nobody. And society somehow thinks that and believes it for whatever reason. But, I've run across people that have gotten over something in 6 months. I've talked to people who have been 25 years deep. I mean, I don't,
Absolutely.
so I mean, for us to quantify and say like it's some destination to reach and you have a time frame to do it in, it is just a disservice to yourself. I watched a show one time I thought was really powerful. It's called 600-Pound Life on TLC. And I could not believe the number of overweight people on that show that their weight had nothing to do with where they were, nothing to do with it. It was actually a lot of very unresolved emotional grief, emotional trauma, emotional loss. And they sat with that grief for a very long time, which is why they put on so much weight. And so I never realized while watching that show, I said, wow, when you hold on to grief like that, it does bad things to your body. And it's not because you want to, by the way. You didn't consciously wake up and say, I want to weigh 600 pounds. This was a journey that happened. This was a time in your life where things just got out of control to a point because you held that grief in. You didn't want to deal with it or face it or try to understand it or try to figure out, how to move forward with it. Or you may not have even had the resources. You may not even had a therapist to talk to. You may not even have supportive family.
Right.
And so it became this really big, epiphany to me that when we hold in grief and we don't have the support we need, our life can really go down a crazy path. And that can be in the form of, being 600 pounds. That could be in the form of doing drugs or alcohol or,
Even a person's house. They might formerly have been a great housekeeper, and now their house is this massive mess. And no one can figure out why the house is always dirty or whatever the case. There was probably some kind of emotional trauma that maybe friends or family are not aware of.
Yeah. And that's hard sometimes because people, I happen to know quite a few of them, by the way. I know people that hold grief in and don't talk about it, and they're not going to talk about it. And if you bring it up, by the way, they get really angry with you.
Right.
And so, there's people that hold that in and bottle it in. And I always tell them, it's like a Coke can. If you shake that thing, eventually you're gonna have to pop it open, and that pressure is going to go all over the place. And the more you hold it in. So, that's why, when I do coaching or on my podcast, I tell people it's a judgment-free space for a reason, because you're going to get that everywhere else. But I'm not doing that over here. This is where you get to be you. And I don't care what way it comes out. I want people to feel that, experience it, so that they can give themselves permission to say, I am who I am. I'm going to be who I'm going to be. And this is how I'm dealing with my grief. And when people get in that place, by the way, they ask for help. They're willing to talk. They're willing to work through things. They're willing to find an answer. And that's where, you're not going to get permission from other people, by the way, to be yourself. You got to give it to yourself. You got to say, I have permission to be me. I have permission to grieve the way I need to grieve, heal the way I need to heal. This is the help I need. When the right person comes along, I'll take it. We got to be kinder to each other in society. And that's the biggest thing I've seen in the grief world is just a lot of people not holding space in a safe way for people that go through loss. And it's really, really sad because I see some beautiful people, and I happen to be one of them, by the way, that got very off track in life and got very depressed. And I didn't have help. And so it hurts me because I see the power in people. I always see the best. I don't see somebody and say, oh, you're messed up, or, oh, you had a bad thing you're not getting over, you're not working through that. I don't see that in people. I see somebody that needs help, and I see somebody that's got a beautiful gift they themselves don't even see yet. And so, like, my brain goes to, if I help one person and I get them to see their gift, and I get them to see that life can be beautiful again, life can be something they can feel empowered by, something they can go out there in the world and do good. When I see people reach that thing when I coach them, it's the most beautiful thing. It makes my day. Like everybody asks me, why do you coach? And I say, I coach to see moments like that because they're so freaking beautiful, man. I said, when you watch somebody just tear the chains off the pain and you watch them find their gifts and you see that fire get lit, oh my God, it's a beautiful thing. I mean, there's nothing better in the world than to see that.
Well, and what you're doing for them just sounds like such a beautiful gift. I just love that you're doing that, and hearing you express these, these thoughts about it. It's just, wow, what a wonderful gift you're giving to people.
Yeah, I mean, I'm coaching a lady right now who's 59 years old, and she lost her mother, her father, and her uncle all in a matter of, I think, a year or two. She had to deal with all sorts of estate planning and finance stuff. And like, I mean, this poor woman, I mean, she came to me angry as all get out. And I know why she was angry. She was hurting. That anger wasn't, I laughed because everybody just told her she was an angry person. And I said, you're not angry. I said, you're hurt. You're trying to grieve. And on top of that, you're trying to deal with estate planning and all this. I said, you got so much going on. It'd drive anybody crazy. So I said, you're not ridiculous for feeling the way you are. You're perfectly fine. You're not broken. You don't need to be fixed. You're dealing with a lot of stuff. So why not have compassion for you? Why not give you the permission? I told her one day in a call, I said, I'm giving you permission just to be you. So
Nice.
I feel like you need to hear that for whatever reason, but I said,
sometimes you
permission
do.
to be you. Like, just be you. I don't care what way it is. And long story short, I've been coaching her for the last 3 months. And I told her one day, I said, you came to me really angry when we first met, lots of stuff going on. And I said, you're conquering these things one by one. And now I see this very empowered, very motivated person who's finding themselves and really saying, this is what I want my life to look like. This is what I want it to be. I'm letting go of what doesn't serve me and stepping into what I'm becoming. And she didn't even see that half the time. And so when I pointed out to her and I see it on her face, I mean, it just makes me happy. So anyway, she's beautiful. She's a beautiful lady. She's made some huge progress in 3 months. It's been beautiful to see.
So nice. I hate that our time is wrapping up, but I did want to end with the question that I told you about, that each guest leaves a question for a future guest. The truth is, I'm really not sure about this particular question, so I've got a backup question just in case.
Okay.
But the last guest, her random question was, would you ever color your hair blue?
Oh my God, that is so funny. All right, shameful moment coming out. You guys will be lucky to hear the story. I did color my hair blue back in middle school. I don't know what happened, but I bought some hair color, put it in there. It was cool for about a week, and then I got over it.
Yeah. Well, being a kid, right?
But you got to try, right? If you don't try, you never know.
So true. So true. Yeah, I used peroxide and dyed my hair like white blonde at one point, just with peroxide, when I was probably in middle school. But I don't think I ever would have done blue. I think my parents would have been like, I don't know what they would have done, but they would not have been happy. Maybe I would have been grounded for a year.
Yeah, mine wasn't, but we got over it. So yeah. I love that question.
Cool. Well, that's good, because I was just, when she asked that, I'm like, okay, if you say so. So, yeah. So I think, were you able to think of a question that you want to ask for the next person?
I'm kind of a deep thinker. So my question I would have for somebody is, what was the most pivotal moment in your life up to this point?
I like it. What was the most pivotal moment in your life up to this moment? Got it. So yeah, that'll be the next guest. It'll be what they answer. The very first guest, and this was my backup question, the first guest who started this chain had asked, how important is love in dealing with your grief? Which I thought was also a really beautiful question.
I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd be curious to hear your take on it, given that you are in that line of working with that.
Love is very important when you go through grief. I will share that when I lost my grandfather, I had a special bond with him. And I always knew it over the years, but it was very unspoken. My grandfather was a old school Norwegian guy that didn't know how to express emotion very well. And I always knew deep down that we had that connection. I always knew it. And I will share the last I think it was last 2 or 3 days that I got to spend time with him before he passed. That was very spoken, very loud. He made it clear. And it wasn't necessarily with words, but it was with action. And I've never forgotten that. And the same thing, I'll share really quickly about my son when I lost him. Same thing. That was one of the most worst moments of my life. I still remember that day like it just happened. But I will say, the first time I got to hold my son, I felt like somebody put a curtain around the room. Nothing outside of that mattered at all. It was just love for my kid. And that moment taught me a lot about grief. And what it taught me, to answer that question fully, is grief is just love with nowhere to go. And so don't ever let go of that, by the way. You have strong grief, you have anger, whatever it is, it's love. It's just masked with something else. So again, with the questions we talked about today, powerful questions. If you're going through grief, you feel angry, you feel this or that or whatever, maybe ask yourself that question: what love is hidden underneath those feelings?
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you for coming today. I'm so glad we got to do this.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show, Zoe.
Oh, you're so welcome. So everyone, please, by all means, check out Chris's podcasts, Empower Grief Journey. Check out his website. Feel free to like and share the Molten Truth while you're at it. And, just tell people about it. I think, there's many people who would benefit from these conversations. So thank you. Thank you again.